Okay, I think we are live. We're gonna wait for this to come up and somebody to confirm that they can actually hear us.
Test two.
Okay, we are there.
Two. Excuse me. Two.
Okay, one is in here. If you're here, you're hearing us. Can you hear us okay? Let us know.
You're not doing it the proper way. Test two. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Sorry, I took a couple minutes there. My mixing deck, for some reason, wasn't registering into the computer and we weren't going to get the good microphone. We don't have headphones on today because we don't have a guest. I'm sorry to tell you, but we do have things to talk about. The title that we have here is Imagine There's No Facebook. And I do want to give a little clarification about the title for a second. Someone had said, you know, I work for Parler, right? Full disclosure, I work for Parler, a competitor of Facebook. And someone said, oh, that's not very business-like for you to have that title. The title is, of course, a play on the song, but also, if you recall from early this week, I know everybody's news cycle memory is pretty short, and I don't always, I don't blame individuals for this as much these days because the crazy news is just coming at us every single day. But Monday, if you recall, there was this big outage on Facebook. And
as a matter of fact, they had problems even yesterday, though. Of course,
did they? Okay, I didn't even notice yesterday.
Yeah. No, but it was nothing as big, and was not clear whether the two things were related.
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah. And so it was so long on Monday, though, that all kinds of people were speculating. There were conspiracy theories and rumors about, Facebook was down for good and there wasn't going to be any Facebook anymore. So it wasn't me as a competitor maliciously, oh, imagine there's no Facebook, it was people were actually imagining what would be, life without Facebook on Monday. And of course, if you saw Mark Zuckerberg's statement in response to the testimony of Frances Haugen, it seemed that part of what he had hoped people would get out of that long outage
was exactly that.
People imagining, the value that they would be losing, right?
They couldn't live without it.
Exactly.
And,
exactly.
That we all have Zuckerberg to thank on our bare knees for everything he has given us.
I mean, there are things that we do have Mark Zuckerberg to thank for, but he's also made a lot of bad decisions since he started Facebook that have put him in a position where all the events of this week have played out such that that you have this very convincing sounding whistleblower go before Congress, go on 60 Minutes and everything, and get people thinking that the only way to save the children from the bad effects of Facebook or Instagram is government regulation, a government takeover of some kind, that is somehow the best solution. So, and yes, you can blame Zuckerberg for the series of decisions that he's made that has gotten to this place.
Hold him accountable for the specific choices.
Sure, and what is he doing today, right? He's placing ads on Facebook as well. That was a story that had come out recently, but we've seen ads by Facebook at least since January. I have got a screen grab.
I saw one even this morning.
Yeah.
Please regulate the business. And as a sort of a disclaimer to your introduction, of course, there is speculation about at least the extent to which this whole sequence of first the 60 Minutes report and then the immediate presentation before Congress and the calls for specific measures,
right,
that it's the result of a so-called setup. It does not seem unlikely. However, I don't think it changes that much as to what our reaction should be, really. because
Right, right.
one thing is,
I mean, it's basically an ad hominem in a certain way, right? But what
Well-
I'm putting, by the way, for context here, there's a link to the Fox Business piece that Benjamin and I got published earlier this week. It was the day after Frances Haugen's testimony, and we stick strictly to the substantive issues raised in her testimony. We don't talk about any of this speculation, right?
Well, I don't think it really matters.
Right.
And this is what it is interesting. It is really interesting in Zuckerberg's response to the angry voices and the outage. He does not address the infamous algorithms at all. He only says it seems unlikely because our advertisers, they don't want to be positioned next to angry content, etc.
And he kept talking about how they work to remove content.
So so if you look at the calls of Haugen, they're maybe twofold, or at least I think it's not arbitrary to split them up in two categories. One is indeed her pointing out to the ill effects of these algorithms, which in one way or another, and I think that is something to talk to an expert about, stimulate
Engagement, right?
engagement, yeah, okay,
Right.
and through bipolar contrasting of opinions. And of course, this is something that we know Twitter does as well. So that's one thing. And then, of course, the only thing that Facebook has been willing to own up to, if you can call it that, is the elimination of content and the placement of their warnings next to content.
And so in the piece, the little bit of language that I stuck in there. So again, these are very collaborative efforts when we write these. He's typically now the awesome draft banger outer. I mean,
and then she kills my darlings.
But well, I leave a lot of them, but then I'll augment and I'll put my own stuff in. So this little comment was mine, but I refer to all of this content, this so-called hate speech, etc., some of the misinformation even, right? The conspiracy theory. I would refer to this as off-gassing from the algorithms, right? These are side effects of the algorithms. And so one of the main points that we make in the piece is that their response, which is to focus on removing content, is a very superficial response. Again, it's like, there's so many analogies and metaphors, but you've got a house and there's an electrical system that's causing fires, symptoms. Right. And you're just putting out the fires and you're not rewiring the house, right? The thing that's interesting about Haugen, and again, it's important to address the substance and talk about what should be done about the substance of what she says. She was calling for a regulation which she assumes would result in a feed that is chronological. And the way she puts it is that it would be a chronological feed except for spam demotion, is I think the way that she put it. But essentially, you're either getting rid of spam or you're making sure that you give less visibility to actual spam. Mm-hmm. And this is all tricky stuff to do, as I've seen in the work in Parler.
You mean technically the
implementation of this sort of thing.
Sure.
But at Parler, this is exactly what we have, right? We have a feed that is just about completely chronological. And again, the exception would be anything that we're trying to do to get rid of actual bots and spam. But in terms of parlays on a feed, there's not too much actually that would even divert from that. I don't even know of a diversion from chronological in the parlays in a feed. Where you will see sometimes we're able to, demote spam would be more in comments and things like that. And we're still working on ways to do that. I saw some spam in comments this morning. It is not a complete science at all. It's always evolving. Every little way that you find to identify what's the spam and what's not, what's the bots, what's not. As soon as you implement that, then these very clever people will work ways around it and stuff. So, this is just a challenge of the platforms. But, but again, to go back to the point of substance, Facebook's response has been superficial, and their distraction from the underlying algorithm, this engagement ranking algorithm, then that is basically allowing them to continue with the thing that supports so much revenue for them. And they're just getting rid of the side effects. They're getting rid of the off-gassing, the consequences of those algorithms. And a lot of, and the effect of that is to restrict freedom of expression, right? And so then there's increased calls for the removal of misinformation and everything else. And it's really funny because I was noticing this the other day on Parler again, being in social media, even though we're up and coming, we're in early days and we're still developing the features of the platform and everything. It's quite simple. I was noticing the other day that if you've got this purely chronological feed like we do, and suppose you're a guy who wants to spread misinformation or some other thing on the platform, it's really hard to get traction. And so the way that they're trying to do it on Parler is some guy will post, some garbage, come see Trump said so-and-so, it's outrageous, and they put a link or whatever. And then they'll spam a bunch of hashtags in there that are completely unrelated to whatever the topic is, just to make sure that if people are using our hashtag search feature, that they'll come across this post, because they don't know any other way to get at people except spamming in comments, spamming in hashtags. We don't give them any help. It's really hard for these accounts to get traction on Parler. It's interesting.
Yeah, because of course, and this is something where I don't think anybody needs an expert. From experience, we all know that there are arcane mysteries as to how your own feed is composed on Facebook. It's not a matter of chronology. It's not even a matter of the people you have on your list or the people you choose to follow. And at a certain point, they gave you more options, but now it's fully under their control. And I think this is where, at least I have personally had to confront myself with a prior received truth or assumption that they are actually acting as a neutral transmitter of the friends and the content you opt for, and that simply does not seem to be the case.
No, now I don't know for sure because I don't spend much time on Facebook and I don't have the app, for example, and stuff. Have you really dug into the settings to see if you can tailor the feed at all? You might be able to.
No,
just
okay.
take some work.
Okay. So no and yes.
Okay.
So some time ago, they gave you more options, and it never properly worked. But in any event, it is not a neutral selection of, and let's use the big R word, not a neutral selection of reality. And that is where I guess we've had our conversations since writing that piece. And so we've talked about the possible implications for contractual compliance.
Right, that is one thing to talk about for sure.
And
is there even consent? Is there informed consent, so to speak?
By a user?
Knowledgeable consent of what you're actually consenting to with respect to certain types of these algorithms. I think that's an interesting question. One of the things that Haugen raised, which I would tend to agree with, is that it's worth revisiting at what age you would allow kids to make a contract to engage on a platform with these algorithms.
Well,
right?
yeah, and then we can extend it to people our age. You could even argue people above a certain age. What do they know about computers? Well, yeah, no, seriously. But so how much insight does a user, or call it an average user, have into the processes? So one thing is the technical, but of course the intents and purposes is another thing. And if you are asking your client to subscribe to a transaction that he has no reasonable understanding of, what are you know, aren't you a snake oil salesman at some point? So that was your take, and I even wondered whether some of these behaviors shouldn't be qualified as fraudulent conduct.
Sure. So
because
there's a representation that you follow these people and they're going to be the ones in your feed, and it's going to be just, ranked according to what they do every day. And it's if there is some misrepresentation about that, then you could deem it fraudulent. So then we'll talk about what to do about that.
Sure. Specifically though, strictly theoretically, of course, take Twitter's trending topic. So how is it decided? How is it determined whether something is a trending topic or not? And
well, and then, okay, so what is a trending topic? And then also, when suppose that, there's an algorithm and identifies accurately even what a trending topic is, and it's neutral. And then there's the little thing. When you click on the little thing that says this is the trending topic, and then it brings you to the posts, on Twitter, it's the tweets, on Parler, it's the parlays. If it brings you to those, we don't have trending on Parler yet, but, we're thinking of, is there a way to do this? If you click on that thing and it brings you to the posts, what does it bring you to? Does it bring you to the actual instigator that's interesting about this topic that people actually started discussing, right? The real issue. And, in discussions with the CEO, George, at Parler, if we're going to implement something like that, we want to figure out a way to get at that, because what often happens on Twitter is they'll take whatever the trending topic is and all these people will start chiming in, and it'll go into some completely weird different direction that often will have a bunch of junk in it, right?
Well,
and so, but you can see the most recent about it, but then you might not even understand, why in the world was this thing trending in the first place? And often if something starts a discussion, it's because there's something actually substantive to discuss, something that has some value.
Right? So by analogy, you can wonder per se whether Twitter is really interested in the snowball, or whether they're just interested in provoking the avalanche,
or just that it is difficult to implement such things in a way that, so for example, they've done those studies, right, where a certain small percentage of the people online are the most vocal ones, and you'll have, and I think it's true that when you're looking at, part of the reason that on Facebook there's more exclusion of conservative voices is that you've got very activist leftists that will go on and report all this content, right? It just takes some very dedicated trolls and a call to action on, TikTok does these call to action sometimes and says, let's go over here and spam so-and-so with blah, blah, blah. And then they go over there and they start doing this, and then suddenly it takes off. Just like with any bot or any spammer behavior, whatever algorithm you try to put in to sort of curb it, they'll figure out a way to get around it. These are not easy problems.
Sure, but that might be true, but I think you're being too generous, in the sense that it is my impression that certainly Twitter has
tons of firepower. Sure.
Has actually encouraged this mob-like behavior. They've, in any event, empowered it. So with Zuckerberg, more of an idea that he found himself in circumstances. He finds, or they find, all these state actors active with their bots and with their click farms. What do they do next? Of course, it was new territory for them, but I think we pointed out in that opinion piece that the choice they made subsequently was to sort of co-opt the forces they had unwittingly discovered, instead of working towards a more individualist platform where you can be pretty sure that all accounts are held by individuals, and that your feed is a representation of your own choices, etc. It's become simply manipulated, and they did get that warning, but they made choices that are not consistent with those expectations or values. Wishes on my part.
Thanks, Daniel, and welcome back to, we've been doing this for a few weeks now, and it's good to see you here. He says the title of the video makes me channel John Lennon. Yeah, that was exactly what came to mind. And again, it was watching people imagine life without Facebook on Monday that had me think of the title. This was the title that we actually submitted with the Fox Business piece, but they changed it, as you see if you go to the link up there. So about that with Facebook and the decisions that they've made the decision not only to not get rid of the underlying algorithm and instead just get rid of the off-gassing, the side effects, as I call it, but over the years, they made a series of decisions with respect to the FTC that have put them in a very compromised position. And I've been talking about this. I mean, I've been doing a show off and on in some form since 2011. And somewhere back there, I think it was sometime in 2012, I can't remember when the first Facebook consent order was with the FTC. And they go after Facebook and they say, you have in effect been fraudulent with respect to privacy practices. You told everybody you're doing this, but instead you did that. And so therefore you have to repent, or, something bad has to happen to you. But the problem with the FTC has been in the bad thing that has to happen to them. So, I think the proper way of dealing with a business fraud, it would be for Facebook to pay some sort of recompense to the people who were damaged. And, measuring that could be difficult, but, it would be sort of like the equivalent of a class action lawsuit where, in this case, if it was the FTC, and if we could talk about whether it's even proper to have an FTC enforce this sort of thing. But you could say maybe you need some sort of expertise in order to properly identify what is fraud and what is not fraud in this context, and how is it perpetrated and what sort of damage does it actually do. These are not easy calculations to make. Now, mind you, if you have a very good class action suit and a judge and experts and all sorts of things, it could probably be done as well or better there. And the FTC is just open for corruption and, everything else. But in any event, the proper way to deal with it would be they pay some sort of damages, and the damages are paid to the people who are victimized by the bad behavior. But what's always been happening so far is maybe there's fines in some cases. There was this, $5 billion fine this last time or something, and everybody goes, oh, it's so big. And then people say it's not big enough and whatever. It's unprecedented for the FTC, but it's not big enough to deal with Facebook, I think, ended up being the consensus. But I don't think the money went to anybody except the government. And then second of all, what they've been doing in an escalating way as part of each of these consent orders is getting the government more and more involved in the running of Facebook. And this was true from the very first consent order, where FTC was going to have supervisory powers over Facebook's privacy practices. and it was going to be for 20 years. And then if Facebook ran afoul of something anytime during that time, then there was going to be more. And then there was a couple others since then. Each time they've ratcheted it up. And again, this last one was the one that I dealt with in the brief that I wrote for Center for the Legalization of Privacy. If you go to legalizeprivacy.org, you can read all about that, legalizeprivacy.org. But there, what ended up happening was the consent order. Not only do they have all this supervision over Facebook, but both the FTC and the DOJ can request all sorts of information from Facebook, and the way that information is described in the consent order and is vague enough so that you could plausibly think that the FTC and the DOJ can call up and get access to Facebook user data, warrantless access to personal data about Facebook users via this consent order. In addition, of course, there was
which is
specification of appointees on different boards governing Facebook, that our federal government, the FTC, the DOJ, has either the right to veto at the beginning or to say whether they can even be removed. Our federal government is appointing people who have influence over how Facebook is run. And this was, sort of rubber stamped by a judge, Timothy Kelly, I believe is his name, a district judge. And that was happening as the pandemic was just getting underway, right? So it was, I think, May of 2020, right around May of 2020, is when the ruling was made. And of course, nobody was going to appeal it because the FTC and Facebook were in agreement about this, that Facebook agreed to be regulated. They're already regulated in the ways dictated in the consent order. So this has been going on for a long time, escalating the amount of government involvement in Facebook. And this is the latest step. And it could be a really huge step if they take Frances Haugen's recommendations.
Well, it would be the logical outcome of recent history. In any event, I think it is vital to understand that under the guise. Well, so I always compare the way the European Union is dealing with these issues to the way it seems to be going in the US, because of course the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was introduced in 2018, or at least was implemented in 2018 in the European Union, and that's specifically directed at protecting personal data on the internet. And there, the assumption is that, of course, the EU is going to protect the users, the citizens, against unauthorized use and abuse by these big companies. Now, or small companies, but of course, the focus always is on big tech corporations. Whereas here, that perspective is rather different, and it seems, one can talk really cynically about these things and speculate about all parties needing contributions from these corporations, so they have a more oblique approach where they, on the one hand, they want to pose as consumer protectors, while not directly acting in their interests, really, but rather seeking these corporatist solutions. And that is another aspect of the crony economy we've talked about in our previous piece. I believe
so you would say there's less cronyism in Europe because they're more skeptical of big corporations in Europe, or no?
No. I mean, there's cronyism there too.
Okay.
and of course, the irony is that a lot of the cronyism happens exactly there, where the EU promulgates its regulations, because how are these regulations formulated? That's in collaboration with industry
Experts, yeah.
Well, yeah, and so it's very similar, but it seems to me that the interest Uncle Sam shows in the data is not, at least not overtly paralleled by what you see in Europe. Of course, part of this difference, you could say, is also due to a more rigorous interpretation of constitutional rights in the U.S., because here you have a Fourth Amendment that, at least in theory, protects your data, and then that's not vis-a-vis other private operators with which you might be entering into a contract, but rather vis-a-vis the government. And that, of course, is where the former constitutional protection seems to be crumbling as a result of this, the cronyist interpretation of business as usual. They can work together to erode our rights, basically.
Yeah, and that is what we're seeing, and that is what we might be seeing. Again, we tried to stay away from the sort of ad hominem, and was this just theater that was set up by Facebook? It really could have just been, here's this Frances Haugen, she's jumped from tech company to tech company, apparently. She did, she's articulate. You see her, she, had all of her talking points down, and she reiterated them multiple times, that she thinks that there has to be oversight and regulation, and that the Facebook can't handle the problem themselves, and they'll be more profitable, and all it, every talking point she had just down. So she's very convincing. So it could be 60 Minutes, the legislators and stuff, they all saw that, here she is, she, for her own reasons, wants to bring this information forward, and they all saw an opportunity, and it all just went that way. It wasn't some sort of pre-orchestrated thing where, Facebook got together with some congressman and said, hey, we'll send over some whistleblower. Point being, it does not matter.
It does not matter.
The thing that matters is, are there underlying problems? Are those problems where government action in some form is appropriate? And if so, what type, right? If so, what type? And that's where I really, get at this, right? If we're talking about the impact on underage kids, I think there is a plausible case to be made, and this would take experts and people coming in to say, at what point does an algorithm and its function on your mind that you're not aware of actually vitiate, eliminate, kill proper consent to form a contract? And is a child capable of overcoming the pull of them? Are adults capable, with respect to some of the algorithms, of overcoming the pull of those things? And, so therefore, have people actually given knowing consent to these? One thing that Haugen mentioned in her testimony, if I recall correctly, and if it's correct, it's very disturbing, is that not everybody is subjected to the same algorithm on Facebook. That some people had this one, and I can't remember, it wasn't organic, or it was something like, you're left out in the wild to fend for yourself. I can't remember what the language was exactly, so I'm sorry. But the idea was that this algorithm, they knew that it was bad for people's minds, and there's a swath of users on Facebook that they subject to this algorithm and then follow them and see how they do. They're conducting these psychological experiments on people. Now, if that's true,
Zuckerberg
that's
farm.
fraudulent, right? That's fraudulent. So you could say, maybe you come at it from, there's no consent to the contract. Maybe you come at it to, that there's been
reasonable
fraud.
or no reasonable expected consent, in the sense that if
Yeah.
you cannot be expected to foresee what they're going to do with you or with your data.
Or no reasonable person in Facebook's shoes, knowing what they know about their algorithms, should expect that the other party has given knowing consent to what is going on that
Okay,
platform,
but then
right?
then you have an assumption of the fraud.
Right.
Yeah.
So some kind of fraud, right?
Yeah.
So some kind of fraud. Clearly, this is what government is for, right? I'm not an anarchist. I believe that government exists properly to protect your rights, to redress violations of rights. And so then the question is, what should be done about it? Now, Frances Haugen, she's calling for oversight. Both she at the hearing and in this $3.5 trillion monstrosity, apparently the 2,700 pages of vomit where they're spending money that doesn't exist and won't ever exist.
Well, it might be vomit, but it's Santa Claus vomit. Free money, folks. Come and get it.
Anyway, in there somewhere is this creation of a board or an extra department within the FTC to protect consumers and blah, blah, blah. So give the FTC more power to go after this is that the way to do it? For me, and again, that piece, we have about 800 words, 850 words if we're lucky when we cram stuff into these op-ed pieces. But there's a couple little things that we talk about in there by way of solutions. One is, yes, definitely look at that consent issue, particularly for the young kids. I think it would be very easy to make a case that just as with alcohol or other addictive, physically addictive substances like cigarettes, that you could say children don't meaningfully consent to a contract to purchase those things.
So there's a really banal comparison you can make. So at a certain point, there were researchers who discovered the possibilities of subliminal messaging. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it had amazing effects for the sales of Coca-Cola during the break, but it's illegal, and for a very good reason. So are we all subjected to subliminal manipulation? Of course, it being subliminal disqualifies it, because if we are not aware,
it disqualifies it if what you're engaging in is a business transaction, which is what you're doing, right? You're trading your attention and your time with Facebook for supposedly a service they're providing.
I'm not sure of any situation in which it would be permissible.
Well, so for example,
if I subject you to subliminal messaging, would that be okay? Excuse me, you can tell me.
Okay, but
I guess you're right. Yeah, I could do that. I could. Don't worry, folks. Everything under control. Of course, it's of course, whether it's a business transaction or any other transaction.
Okay. So then we talk about ethics, and then we talk about whether you could sue somebody in that situation, or whether I should just not speak to you ever again. Right?
Sure.
Okay, so there's different
ways
depending on who's doing it to you in what context.
Okay. But no. Sure. No, of course, you're right.
A company lies to you, it's fraud. Your friend lies to you, they're not your friend anymore, right?
Fair enough. But I think where we're coming from, or maybe I should speak for myself, but for quite some time resisted the pleas from let's say conservative voices who were saying they're censoring us, and they are that they were biased, I guess, is something that was harder to deny. And then, of course, the argument, they have their private platform, so they can do with it what they want. But of course, it being a private platform doesn't mean that they can do anything they want.
Of course not. Well,
with
and then-
disregard for
Sure.
the rights of their users.
Right, so even if they were a purely private platform, which we've argued, and I argue they aren't,
Well,
they still could not do
yeah.
this without consequence properly. There were
no,
consequences.
because
Either
if
they
they use,
haven't gotten,
No, well, we can-
consent for their contract, or
well,
it's fraudulent.
so I've called them algorithms as a play on algorithms that exploit anger or anger and fear. We can also call it subliminal algorithms, and I think that sort of renders the concept as well.
Sure. And so these, you would say it's a subject of fraud. Now, Daniel's asking here, he says, doesn't US law already legitimately require clear consent to be subjected to scientific, psychological, in this case, experimentation? My guess is that if that is not if it's not codified, that this has been, explored to a large extent in contract law, and so that you could find it. I haven't dug into recent contract cases for quite a long time. I haven't taught contract law for quite a long time. Unfortunately, I enjoyed it. I'm a real geek that way. I like contract law. But no, this would be classic, that you would go ahead and have people explore whether there could be knowing proper consent, where a reasonable person in Facebook's position could, reasonably infer that there was knowing consent to everything that the contract entailed when a user signs up for Facebook and agrees to have that feed fed to him. So I think there's that. If there has been an inadequate exploring of this issue in the space of social media, it's because of a problem that was raised during the testimony. And the problem that was raised during the testimony was the Section 230 immunity that we all know, and I've said it a few times, but I'm going to say it again. And my references are going to sound technical, specific, law geek. Don't tune out, right? This is important stuff, because we have to figure out how to handle this in a way that doesn't create further entanglement between government and big tech. Because right now we might have at least an orchestration of interests moving towards having government take more control over Facebook, which is a recipe for creating Big Brother right there. Because, here you have on Facebook, many people get all of their news and information from Facebook, and how much personal data you're giving to Facebook, only they and the DOJ and the FTC know.
So
how much information
we've seen step one being enacted. That is, the DOJ has a rather informal though formalized backdoor to the data that Facebook collects. And then, of course, the next step is, are they gonna have access to these algorithms? But isn't, as to the question about the clear consent, isn't what we're dealing with here also a fact of these being novelties? And
no, true.
And it's for a reason, of course, that Zuckerberg does not want to talk about them, because
he's always
they're
distracting.
business secret.
He says, look, we remove content. We're always getting better, and we're willing to sign on for regulations that require us that require us to remove content. So let me finish the train of thought here, because I'll lose it. So with this, the question again about, would you fully explore this consent issue? One of the questions is whether it's adequately been explored because of Section 230. The Section 230 immunity might shut down litigation before an issue like this is adequately explored. Now, the reason for it is not necessarily the language in Section 230. That's the point that I wanted to make. And again, keep your thinking caps on here. Justice Clarence Thomas, while I don't always agree with him, because he has called and everybody jumped on it, Clarence Thomas has called for Facebook and other platforms to be public utilities. Throw that out. I think that's wrong. That's Big Brother right there. But the other thing that he has done that I think people should pay more attention to is that he has explained how you would give section 230 a proper, narrower interpretation. It was not done in the context of a case that went fully to adjudication in front of the Supreme Court. It was done in a statement that Justice Clarence Thomas wrote, published, in conjunction with the Supreme Court refusing to hear a case. It's called a denial of certiorari. So the case, I'm going to tell you the name of the case, and it's easy to find, actually. If you use Google, don't use Google, use DuckDuckGo. Right?
DuckDuckGo.
I should become, an affiliate or something if there is such a thing for DuckDuckGo instead, and we'll talk about why in a minute before we wrap up. But Clarence Thomas wrote in a case called Malwarebytes versus Enigma. So Malwarebytes, all one word, versus Enigma. And the Supreme Court refused to hear it. He wrote this statement and it got published, and it's an extensive explanation as to how you give the existing language in section 230 and an interpretation that is narrower and actually the proper interpretation, so that with respect to anything that Facebook contributes to the content that has caused damage, whatever they contribute, they can be held accountable for. And their contribution could be, of course, that they've edited the comment, they've editorialized on it, they've maybe published content entirely of their own accord. And it could also be the algorithms that elevate the exposure of some content over others, right? So you can imagine a class action suit, a bunch of teenage girls who have developed eating disorders after a long time using Instagram. And you would adopt the narrower interpretation that Justice Clarence Thomas recommends in the briefs where you're making your arguments before the court. And I think there's a good chance that something like that can succeed. We're starting to see some of that where with respect to, I believe it was sex trafficking on Facebook and or Twitter, some of the cases are starting to go forward and not just be knocked out on the grounds of section 230 immunity. Now, that is a way to do it. That is a way to do it that would redress the specific harm. And often it would redress a harm that is also a crony harm in nature. So we've talked about this before with respect to Donald Trump's lawsuits about censorship and everything. But you use a court case to address a specific harm, give recompense to the victims. Perhaps you're going to excise some cronyist censorship cancer or other cooperation between the government and social media, and you would do it in a way that doesn't create some long-standing relationship between some part of the state or federal government with social media, because you don't want to combine social media and government. You don't want to.
Well, there are even simpler issues that could be addressed. I mean, I've advertised a little bit on Facebook in the past, and of course they like to pose, and this was, of course, one of their chosen strategies as Apple was cutting off one source or one easy source of data for them. And what happens if you buy a Facebook ad? They have click farms, right? So you get all these likes from people who are clearly not interested in your product, who live at the other end of the world,
where they probably don't even speak your language, so they couldn't be interested in it.
That is doubtful. So how much of that is fraud too?
So you would have to put these class action lawsuits together most likely, but I think that is the way that we should be moving forward. But instead, what Frances Haugen is calling for is some sort of oversight, that there's going to be a committee and it's going to be made up of experts and government bureaucrats, and that they are going to supervise, which is translates into control.
there again, regardless of whether you believe this is a setup, this is coordinated, etc., it doesn't matter. This is the way history happens, because Zuckerberg's answer is already out there. It has been out there all the time, and he'll and that was, as a matter of fact, one of his points in his own statement. I've repeatedly asked before Congress that I am in favor of regulations, etc. So this is where it will lead to. Of course, he doesn't want to give his the keys to to his business secrets, which he'll say. Are these, you keep talking about algorithms, they don't really exist, and it wouldn't be in our interest, etc. So the compromise would of course be more of what they're doing already, which is deciding, and then of course they say, it's not us who decide, it's independent experts, or it's the CDC who decides what you can see and not see, or and so on and so forth. And of course, in the meantime, Google has already announced.
She makes a phone call.
Well, but considering the world we live in, Google has announced the other day already that they're going to apply their Corona algorithms as to allowed and illegal or unpermitted speech to the climate now.
Right.
So,
and that's in the program notes, by the way. You guys, the program notes over at don'tletitgo.com.
That's where we're going to enter into a brave new world entirely.
Yeah, no, exactly. Daniel has not only done legal research for us. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say I should be paying him. Exactly. Great minds. So, one thing I wanted to say, Daniel, if you want to do legal research on this, I would go into the Uniform Commercial Code. Maybe in the Uniform Commercial Code, there is some actual provision, but of course, I would love to just dig into some juicy case law, and especially if there was an opinion written by Judge Alex Kaczynski. Those were always my favorite contract law opinions. There was a great one about in California not properly enforcing contracts that are written super clearly because of a really horrible way of interpreting a particular common law contract. Anyway, it's great, good stuff from him. But I would love to hear what he has to say. So yes, do go to don'tletitgo.com, because one of the articles that I have there for you to look at, and it's just, this is all by way of warning, right? The latest, this week's affront from Google YouTube is that they are going to be removing monetization from anybody who's doing climate change denying, as they call it, on YouTube or Google. You can't get ad revenue through Google if you are a climate change denier. So that's a huge source of revenue just cut off for all kinds of people. And what are they doing again? They're measuring compliance. So check that out. Again, what sorts of remedies do we recommend? We recommend remedies that will, actually deal with the problem. Yes, you have to bring in some sort of government action, but it's going to be a government action that is surgical, that will come in and take care of the problem, redress the real grievances at stake. If there is cronyism at the root of why this problem exists, you could maybe put orders in place that would order the parties involved to not engage in this particular type of cronyist behavior. But you don't have a long-standing government supervision of these platforms.
What you want least of all is have these regulations based on Facebook suggestions. That's the best way of ensuring there will be a chronopoly. How about that?
A chronopoly, okay.
Chronopoly.
Well, you saw it right here, coined on our show. I came up with crony care, and then I came up with something else I can't remember, but okay, chronopoly.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
I love it.
Because of course it
yeah.
will ensure that any competitor will have a heck of a lot of trouble of competing with them.
I'm telling you, so, Facebook, if you recall in their hearings, what have they called for? They've called for a couple different things. One of them is so-called transparency with respect to how social media companies deal with content. Now, they like to say that it would apply only to companies of a certain size. And so therefore the little tiny guys who are trying to get into the field and the blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is that Facebook has resources that are unparalleled anywhere. And, the stuff that they can do easily without even barely feeling the cost is something that Parler, I mean, we're, trying to just improve the quality of our tech all the time, and to spend so much time and resources just creating reports for the government. And I'll tell you, I've looked at we have an industry class, filtering, and then we also have, there's contractors who do human review of material on Parler. And a very, very small percentage is even what they call so-called hate. Everybody tries to paint Parler as some cesspool of terrible content, but it turns out that there's just a very small amount of it on Parler, where I've looked at the stats, right? So, and that now, I say that, and there's all these trolls are going to come on and they're going to be, let's type a whole bunch of it in and make them look bad.
That's me generally.
Is that you? Yeah, mostly you. But the point being is that, yeah, they're going to try to keep others from entering. The way to deal with this again is through these surgical measures that use existing law and the help of judges and experts and smart lawyers and hardworking lawyers to solve this problem in a way that again doesn't create that further entanglement.
And I'd add to that sort of a note about keeping your eyes on the ball, because of course there's a reason why, or let's put it differently, insults or ad hominems, etc., all that, it doesn't add to the conversation, right?
Right.
So while everybody acknowledges, everybody sees that at these times that we really need to have substantive conversations about a number of issues, that it's not happening, but it seems to lead to only more senseless, let's call it senseless polarization, which frankly, I don't believe, if you talk to people, and that's my experience anyway, if you talk to people in person, you get way more nuanced ideas, and you have to ask yourself. So that's my idea about keeping our eyes on the ball. Maybe what these platforms have been presenting to us is not reality at all, and we shouldn't forget that.
No, I think
to have real conversations with real people, and you'll find that a lot of people are really very reasonable, and they cannot be easily manipulated as long as they know what they're dealing with.
And that's right. They have to know what they're dealing with. One of the plans that we're starting to talk at Parler about the plans for next year, because this year has been spending so much time just rebuilding and giving people a solid infrastructure to have these types of conversations. And then next year it is about doing things to try to further and promote and facilitate these types of substantive conversations. We do have a filter on Parler. I call it the trolling filter, and the reason I want to call it that is because I think calling it hate speech is classifying it based on emotion. What are trolls? Trolls are people who come in and they're not interested in having this substantive discussion, and they just throw a bunch of blah in there and try to make people feel bad, stir up their emotions and everything. And we all know, again, that's logically irrelevant. It doesn't contribute anything of value to the conversation. On Parler, the difference is that so long as Parler is allowed to be Parler, we put the controls over those filters in the hands of the individual user. You decide, do you want this content to be in your feed, but behind our cute little splash? Or do you want to click it and, you know, reveal it? Or do you want to go into your controls and turn the filter off entirely because you want to see all the racist and whatever other stuff? Because sometimes those filters make a mistake too. It might actually obscure a piece of content that isn't purely racist, blah. So, you know, you make the decision though, right? We give you tools, we give you the best tools we can, you make the decision. I think that is the proper way. And I want to evangelize for that. And I also want to evangelize for using a platform that gives you that sort of opportunity, you know, where it's not filtered based on viewpoint or content. As long as it's legal, you can say it. And everybody just start actually discussing the issues that matter going forward. One thing I also wanted to point it out before we go, on the program notes at don'tletitgo.com at the bottom, I have a video from JP Sears. We had the great honor of speaking with JP for a while yesterday. Super nice guy. My impression was he's exactly in person who he is there. You know, when you see him in these videos, I mean, there's just no, you know, disconnect between what you see in person and what you see in those videos. What I'm sharing there is a video you might not have seen yet. It's just pure fun. There's no politics. It's just laughter for you. It's my favorite non-political video from JP. So just enjoy it. And then go, if you haven't, and explore his other stuff. I was telling him yesterday, because I like to think I'm exactly like that too. You know, I'm the same person. So, you know, for me, I tell him, I say, look, there's some things that, you know, because of the particular topic and what you're saying about it, I can't find any of it funny. And then he even said, yeah, me too. So, you know, some of the stuff you're not going to find as funny, but some of it, and it's challenging these days, some of it, he's just brilliant at revealing the absurdity of certain things and or revealing the evil of certain things in a way that if it catches you at the right time, you will laugh. It's so good these days to be able to just laugh about something silly, or, you know, especially if someone is really good at helping you laugh about something that has been preying on your mind and it gives you a bit of relief from that. It's a great thing too, I think.
Yeah, well, we have to mock authority. I think that's the healthiest thing in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you again, Daniel. I really appreciate, and now he says I'm trying to influence the algorithm on YouTube. I appreciate. I don't know. So now we could start to go into a different type of case, Daniel, right? So what if it is one user trying to manipulate the algorithm for another? I mean, that's what we had with the Russian thing that we talked about in the piece, right? You had the Russian users trying to manipulate other users into
so
doing the
we need an
demonstrations,
opposing
right?
view to sponsor.
That's true. Somebody who disagrees with Daniel to come on and start.
Can we have a troll? Can we have a troll?
A troll with
Trolls, come
money.
in, please. Wealthy trolls.
Okay. We better go. We will be back next week, maybe with an interview. I'm hoping so. I've been putting feelers out to various people that I would love to speak to here. Yeah, some that I haven't. I won't even mention some of the names yet, but they're pretty cool. And but some require preparation, so I have some reading to do and things like that. So we'll do it. I'm gonna get it. Last week we went to ACL. You guys, if you're in Austin, go to Austin City Limits. Go to Austin City Limits.
Yeah, see loads of people having a good time.
Yeah, it was so nice. Oh yeah, he says, one of you fight me, the trolls. Come on.
Can I fight her? Anyway, don't worry.
YouTube's
Don't
gonna
worry.
exclude us because we're like beating each other up.
Next week, you'll get my full report about subliminally influencing her. I'll give you all the data. And well, You should go there. Anyway, without jokes, have a great weekend. Have a great week.
Thank
And
you, everybody.
don't do anything I wouldn't do myself.
There's almost no restrictions in